All right, guys, we're on Godfather, chapter 30. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's about 10 and a half pages, so 20, 25 minutes. We're almost done with this book, man. So the Godfather actually died. Don Corleone has passed. And so here we go, chapter 30, book number 8. So Albert Neri sat in his Bronx apartment and carefully brushed the blue serge of his old policeman's uniform. He unpinned the badge and set it on the table to be polished. The regulation holster and gun were draped over a chair. This old routine of detail made him happy in some strange way. One of the few times he had felt happy since his wife had left him nearly 2 years ago. He had married Rita when she was a high school kid and he was a rookie policeman. She was shy, dark-haired, from a straight-laced Italian family who never let her stay out later than 10 o'clock at night. Neri was completely in love with her innocence, her virtue, as well as her dark prettiness. At first, Rita Neri was fascinated by her husband. He was immensely strong, and she could see people were afraid of him because of that strength and his unbending attitude toward what was right and wrong. He was rarely tactful. If he disagreed with the group's attitude or an individual's opinion, he kept his mouth shut or brutally spoke his contradiction. He never gave a polite agreement. He also had a true Sicilian temper, and his rages could be awesome, but he was never angry with his wife. Neri, in the space of 5 years, became one of the most feared policemen on the New York City force, also one of the most honest, but he had his own ways of enforcing the law. He hated punks, and when he saw a bunch of young rowdies making a disturbance on a street corner at night, disturbing passerbys, he took quick and decisive action. Passers-by. That's how you say it, passers-by. He enjoyed, he employed a physical strength that was truly extraordinary, which he himself did not fully appreciate. One night in Central Park West, he jumped out of the patrol car and lined up 6 punks in black silk jackets. His partner remained in the driver's seat, not wanting to get involved, knowing Neri, the 6 boys, all in their late teens, had been stopping people and asking them for cigarettes in a youthfully menacing way, but not doing anyone any real physical harm. They'd also teased girls going by with a sexual gesture, more French than American. Neri lined them up against a stone wall that closed off Central Park from 8th Avenue. It was twilight, but Neri carried his favorite weapon, a huge flashlight. He never bothered drawing his gun. It was never necessary. His face when he was angry was so brutally menacing, combined with his uniform, that the usual punks were cowed. These were no exception. Neri asked the first youth in the black silk jacket, "What's your name?" The kid answered with an Irish name. Neri told him, "Get off the street. I see you again tonight, I'll crucify you." He, he motioned with his flashlight and the youth walked quickly away. Neri followed the same procedure with the next 2 boys. He let them walk off, but the fourth boy gave an Italian name and smiled at Neri as if to claim some sort of kinship. Neri was unmistakably of Italian descent. Neri looked at this youth for a moment and asked superfluously, "You Italian?" The boy grinned confidently. Neri hit him a stunning blow on the forehead with his flashlight. The boy dropped to his knees. The skin and flesh of his forehead had cracked open, and blood poured down his face. But it was strictly a flesh wound. Neri said to him harshly, "You son of a bitch, you're a disgrace to the Italians. You gave us all a bad name. Get on your feet." He gave the youth a kick in the side, not gentle, not too hard. "Get home and stay off the street. Don't ever let me catch you wearing that jacket again either. I'll send you to the hospital. Now get home. You're lucky I'm not your father." Never didn't bother with the other 2 punks. He just booted their asses down the avenue, telling them he didn't want them on the street that night. In such encounters, all was done so quickly that there was no time for a crowd to gather or for someone to protest his actions. Larry would get into the patrol car and his partner would zoom it away. Of course, once in a while, there would be a real hard case who wanted to fight and might even pull a knife. These were truly unfortunate people. Larry would, with awesome, quick ferocity, beat them bloody and throw them into the patrol car. They would be put under arrest and charged with assaulting an officer, but usually their case would have to wait until they were discharged from the hospital. Eventually, Neri was transferred to the beat that held the United Nations building area, mainly because he had not shown his precinct sergeant the proper respect. The United Nations people, with their diplomatic immunity, parked their limousines all over the streets without regard to police regulations. Neri complained to the precinct and was told not to make waves, to just ignore it, but one night there was a whole side street that was impassable because of the carelessly parked autos. It was after midnight, so Neri took his huge flashlight from the patrol car and went down the street smashing windshields to smithereens. It was not easy even for high-ranking diplomats to get the windshields repaired in less than a few days. Protests poured into the police precinct station house, demanding protection against this vandalism. After a week of windshield smashing, the truth gradually hit somebody about what was actually happening, and Albert Neri was transferred to Harlem. One Sunday, shortly afterward, Neri took his wife to visit his widowed sister in Brooklyn. Albert Neri had the fierce protective affection for his sister common to all Sicilians, and he always visited her at least once every couple of months to make sure she was all right. She was much older than he was and had a son who was 20. This son, Thomas, without a father's hand, was giving trouble. He had gotten into a few minor scrapes, was running a little wild. Neri had once used his contacts on the police force to keep the youth from being charged with larceny. On that occasion, he had kept his anger in check, but had given his nephew warning. Tommy, you make my sister cry over you, and I'll straighten you out myself. It was intended as a friendly Paulie uncle warning, not really as a threat. But even though Tommy was the toughest kid in that tough Brooklyn neighborhood, he was afraid of his Uncle Al. On this particular visit, Tommy had come in very late Saturday night and was still sleeping in his room. His mother went to wake him, telling him to get dressed so that he could eat Sunday dinner with his uncle and aunt. The boy's voice came harshly through the partly open door. I don't give a shit, let me sleep. And his mother came back out into the kitchen, smiling apologetically. So they had to eat their dinner without him. Neri asked his sister if Tommy was giving her any real trouble, and she shook her head. Neri and his wife were about to leave when Tommy finally got up. He barely grumbled a hello and went into the kitchen. Finally, he yelled in to his mother, Hey, Ma, how about cooking me something to eat? But it was not a request. It was a spoiled complaint of an indulged child. His mother said shrilly, Get up when it's dinner time and then you can eat. I'm not going to cook again for you. It was a sort of little ugly scene that was fairly commonplace, but Tommy, still a little irritable from his slumber, made a mistake. Ah, fuck you and your nagging. I'll go out and eat. As soon as he said it, he regretted it. His Uncle Al was on him like a cat on a mouse, not so much for the insult of his sister this particular day, because it was obvious that he often talked to his mother in such a fashion when they were alone. So not so much for the insult to his sister this particular day, but because it was obvious that he often talked to his mother in such a fashion when they were alone. Tommy never dared say such a thing in front of her brother. This particular Sunday he had just been careless to his misfortune. Before the frightened eyes of the two women, Al Neri gave his nephew a merciless, careful physical beating. At first, the youth made an attempt at self-defense, but soon gave that up and begged for mercy. Neri slapped his face until the lips were swollen and bloody. He rocked the kid's head back and slammed him against the wall. He punched him in the stomach, then got him prone on the floor and slapped his face into the carpet. He told the two women to wait and make Tommy go down the street and get into his car. There he put the fear of God into him. If my sister ever tells me you talk like that to her again, this beating will seem like kisses from a broad, he told Tommy. I want to see you straighten out. Now go up the house and tell my wife I'm waiting for her. It was 2 months after this that Al Neri got back from a late shift on the force and found his wife had left him. She had packed all her clothes and gone back to her family. Her father told him that Rita was afraid of him, that she was afraid to live with him because of his temperament, or because of his temper. Al was stunned with disbelief. He had never struck his wife, never threatened her in any way, had never felt anything but affection for her, but he was so bewildered by her action that he decided to let a few days go by before he went over to her family's house to talk to her. It was unfortunate that the next night he ran into trouble on his shift. His car answered a call in Harlem, a report of a deadly assault. As usual, Neri jumped out of the patrol car while it was still rolling to a stop. It was after midnight and he was carrying his huge flashlight. It was easy spotting the trouble. There was a crowd gathered outside a tenement doorway. One Negro woman said to Neri, There's a man in there cutting a little girl. Neri went into the hallway. There was an open door at the far end with light streaming out, and he could hear moaning. Still handling the flashlight, he went down the hall and through the open doorway. He almost fell over two bodies stretched out on the floor. One was a Negro woman of about 25. The other was a Negro girl of no more than 12. Both were bloody from razor cuts on their faces and bodies. In the living room, Neri saw the man who was responsible. He knew him well. The man was Wax Baines, a notorious pimp, dope pusher, and strong-arm artist. His eyes were popping from drugs now. The bloody knife he held in his hand wavered. Neri had arrested him 2 weeks before for severely assaulting one of his whores in the street. Bain had told him, Hey man, this is none of your business. And Neri's partner had also said something about letting the niggers cut each other up if they wanted to, but Neri had hauled Baines into the station house. Baines was bailed out the very next day. Neri had never much liked Negroes, and working in Harlem had made him like them even less. They all were on drugs or booze while they let their women work or peddle ass. He didn't have any use for any of the bastards, so Baines' brazen breaking of the law infuriated him, and the sight of the little girl all cut up with the razor sickened him. Quite coolly in his own mind, he decided not to bring Baines in, but witnesses were already crowding into the apartment behind him, some people who lived in the building and his partner from the patrol car. Neri ordered Baines, "Drop your knife, you're under arrest." Baines laughed. "Man, you gotta use your gun to arrest me." He held up his knife, or he held his knife up. "Or maybe you want this." Neri moved very quickly so his partner would not have time to draw a gun. The Negro stabbed with his knife, but Neri's extraordinary reflexes enabled him to catch the thrust with his left palm. But his right hand, he swung the flashlight in a short, vicious arc. Or with his right hand, the blow caught Baines on the side of the head and made his knees buckle, comically like a drunk's. The knife dropped from his hand. He was quite helpless, so Neri's second blow was inexcusable, as a police departmental hearing in his criminal trial later proved with the help of the testimony of witnesses and his fellow policemen. That's just stupid. So Neri brought the flashlight down on top of Baines' skull in an incredibly powerful blow, which shattered the glass of the flashlight, the enamel shield and the bulb itself popping out and flying across the room. The heavy aluminum barrel of the flashlight tube bent, and only the batteries inside prevented it from doubling on itself. One odd onlooker, a Negro man who lived in the tenement and later testified against Neri, said, "Man, that's a hard-headed nigger." But Baines' head was not quite hard enough. The blow caved in his skull. He died 2 hours later in the Harlem hospital. Albert Neri was the only one surprised when he was brought up on departmental charges for using excessive force. He was suspended and criminal charges were brought against him. He was indicted for manslaughter, convicted, and sentenced to from 1 to 10 years in prison. By this time, he was so filled with a baffled rage and hatred of all society, that he didn't give a damn. That they dared to judge him a criminal. That they dared to send him to prison for killing an animal like that pimp nigger. That they didn't give a damn for the woman and little girl who had been carved up, disfigured for life, and still in the hospital. He did not fear prison. He felt that because of his having been a policeman, and especially because of his nature of the offense, he would be well taken care of. Several of his buddy officers had already assured him they would speak to friends. Only his wife's father, a shrewd old-style Italian who owned a fish market in the Bronx, realized that a man like Albert Neri had little chance of surviving a year in prison. One of his fellow inmates might kill him. If not, he was almost certain to kill one of them. Out of guilt that his daughter had deserted a fine husband for some womanly foolishness, Neri's father-in-law used his contacts with the Corleone family. He paid protection money to one of its representatives and supplied the Corleone itself with the finest fish available as a gift. He petitioned for their intercession. The Corleone family knew about Albert Neri. He was something of a legend as a legitimately tough cop. He had made a certain reputation as a man not to be held lightly, as a man who could inspire fear out of his own person, regardless of the uniform and the sanctioned gun he wore. The Corleone family was always interested in such men. The fact that he was a policeman did not mean too much. Many young men started down a false path to their true destiny. Time and fortune usually set them aright. It was Pete Clemenza, with his fine nose for good personnel, who brought the Neri affair to Tom Hagen's attention. Hagen studied the copy of the official police dossier and listened to Clemenza. He said, "Maybe we have another Luca Brasi here." Clemenza nodded his head vigorously. Though he was very fat, his face and none of the usual stout man's So Clemenza nodded his head vigorously. Though he was very fat, his face had none of the usual stout man's benignity. "My thinking exactly. Mike should look into this himself." And so it was that before Albert Neri was transferred from the temporary jail to what would have been his permanent residence upstate, he was informed that the judge had reconsidered his case on the basis of new information and affidavits submitted by high police officials. His sentence was suspended and he was released. Albert Neri was no fool, and his father-in-law no shrinking violet. Neri learned what had happened and paid his debt to his father-in-law by agreeing to get a divorce from Rita. Then he made a trip out to Long Beach to thank his benefactor. Arrangements had been made beforehand, of course. Michael received him in his library. Neri stated his thanks in formal tones and was surprised and gratified by the warmth with which Michael received his thanks. "Hell, I couldn't let them do that to a fellow Sicilian," Michael said. "They should have given you a goddamn medal, but those damn politicians don't give a shit about anything except pressure groups. Listen, I would never have stepped into the picture if I hadn't checked everything out and saw what a raw deal you got. One of my people talked to your sister and she told us how you were always worried about her and her kid, how you straightened the kid out, kept him from going bad." So one of my people talked to your sister. "Your father-in-law says you're the finest fellow in the world. That's rare." Tactfully, Michael did not mention anything about Neri's wife having left him. They chatted for a while. Neri had always been a taciturn man, but he found himself opening up to Michael Corleone. Michael was only about 5 years his senior, but Neri spoke to him as if he were much older, older enough to be his father. Finally, Michael said, "There's no sense getting you out of jail and then just leaving you high and dry. I can arrange some work for you. I can arrange some work for you. I have interest out in Las Vegas. With your experience, you could be a hotel security man, or if there's some little business you'd like to go into, I can put a word in with the banks to advance you a loan for capital." Now he was overcome with grateful embarrassment. He proudly refused and then added, "I have to stay under the jurisdiction of the court anyway with the suspended sentence." Michael said briskly, "That's all crap detail. I can fix that. Forget about that supervision. And just so the banks won't get choosy, I'll have your fallow sheet pulled, or I'll have your yellow sheet pulled." The yellow sheet was a police record of criminal offenses committed by any individual. It was usually submitted to a judge when he was considering what sentence to give a convicted criminal. Neri had been long enough on the police force to know that many hoodlums going up for sentencing had been treated leniently by the judge because a clean yellow sheet had been submitted by the Bride Police Records Department. So he was not too surprised that Michael Corleone could do such a thing. He was, however, surprised that such trouble would be taken on his account. "If I need help, I'll get in touch," Neri said. "Good, good," Michael said. He looked at his watch, and Neri took this for his dismissal. He rose to go. Again, he was surprised. "Lunchtime," Michael said. "Come on and eat with me and my family. My father said he'd like to meet you. We'll walk over to his house. My mother should have some fried peppers and eggs and sausages, real Sicilian style." That afternoon was the most agreeable Albert Neri had spent since he was a small boy, since the days before his parents had died when he was only 15. Don Corleone was at his most amiable and was delighted when he discovered that Neri's parents had originally come from a small village only a few minutes from his own. The talk was good, the food was delicious, the wine robustly red. Neri was struck by the thought that he was finally with his own trust people. He understood that he was only a casual guest, but he knew he could find a permanent place and be happy in such a world. Michael and the Don walked him out of his car. The Don shook his hand and said, "You're a fine fellow." They walked him out to his car. The Don shook his hand and said, "You're a fine fellow. My son Michael here, I've been teaching him the olive business. I'm getting old. I want to retire, and he comes to me and he says he wants to interfere in your little affair. I tell him to just learn about the olive oil, but he won't leave me alone. He says here is this fine fellow, a Sicilian, and they are doing this dirty trick to him." He kept on. He gave me no peace until I interested myself in it. There's a typo right here. Interested myself it. I tell you this to tell you that he was right. Now that I've met you, I'm glad we took the trouble. So if we can do anything further for you, just ask the favor, understand? We're at your service. Remembering the Don's kindness, Neri wished the great man was still alive to see the service that would be done this day. It took Neri less than 3 days to make up his mind. He understood he was being courted, but understood more, that the Corleone family approved that act of which society condemned and had punished him for. The Corleone family valued him, society did not. He understood that he would be happier in the world the Corleones had created than in the world outside. And he understood that the Corleone family was the more powerful within its narrower limits. He visited Michael again and put his cards on the table. He did not want to work in Vegas, but he would take a job with the family in New York. He made his loyalty clear. Michael was touched. Neri could see that. It was arranged, but Michael insisted that Neri take a vacation first down in Miami at the family hotel there, all expenses paid in a month's salary in advance so he could have the necessary cash to enjoy himself properly. That vacation was Neri's first taste of luxury. People at the hotel took special care of him, saying, "Ah, you're a friend of Michael Corleone." The word had been passed along. He was given one of the plush suites, not the grudging small room a poor relation might be fobbed off with. The man running the nightclub in the hotel fixed him up with some beautiful girls. When Neri got back to New York, he had a slightly different view on life in general. He was put in the Clemenza regime and tested carefully by that masterful personnel man. Certain precautions had to be taken. He had, after all, once been a policeman, but Neri's natural ferocity overcame whatever scruples he might have had at being on the other side of the fence. In less than a year, he had made his bones. He could never turn back. Clemenza sang his praises. Neri was a wonder, the new Luca Brasi. He would be better than Lucas, or he would be better than Luca, Clemenza bragged. After all, Neri was his discovery. Physically, the man was a marvel, his reflexes and coordination such that he could have been another Joe DiMaggio. Clemenza also knew that Neri was not a man to be controlled by someone like himself. Neri was made directly responsible to Michael Corleone with Tom Hagen as a necessary buffer. He was a special and as such commanded a high salary but did not have his own living, a bookmaking or strong arm operation. It was obvious that his respect for Michael Corleone was enormous, and And one day Hagen said jokingly to Michael, "Why now you've got your Luca. Why now you've got your Luca." Michael nodded. He had brought it off. Albert Neri was his man to the death, and of course it was a trick learned from the Don himself. While learning the business, undergoing the long days of tutelage by his father, Michael had one time asked, "How come you used a guy like Luca Brasi, an animal like that?" The Don had proceeded to instruct him. "There are men in this world," he said, "who go about demanding to be killed. You must have noticed them. They quarrel in gambling games. They jump out of their automobiles in a rage if someone so much as scratches their fender. They humiliate and bully people whose capabilities they do not know. I have seen a man, a fool, deliberately infuriate a group of dangerous men, and he himself without any resources. These are people who wander through the world shouting, 'Kill me, kill me,' and there was always somebody ready to oblige them. We read about it in the newspapers every day. Such people, of course, do a great deal of harm to others also." Luca Brasi was such a man, but he was such an extraordinary... Get the fuck out of me. So Luca Brasi was such a man, but he was such an extraordinary man that for a long time nobody could kill him. Most of these people are of no concern to ourselves, but a Brasi is a powerful weapon to be used. The trick is that since he does not fear death and indeed looks for it, then the trick is to make yourself the only person in the world that he truly desires not to kill him. He has only that one fear, not of death, but that you may be the one to kill him. He is yours then. It was one of the most valuable lessons given by the Don before he died, and Michael had used it to make Neri his Luca Brasi. And now finally Albert Neri, alone in his Bronx apartment, was going to put on his police uniform again. He brushed it carefully, polishing the holster would be next, and his policeman's cap too. The visor had to be cleaned, the stout black shoes shined. Neri worked with a will. He had found his place in the world. Michael Corleone had placed his absolute trust in him, and today he would not fail that trust. So is he going to disguise himself as a policeman again? Oh yeah, they're going to go probably kill one of the Taraglias and the Salazos, I think, or that little alliance that's going on. So it's Albert Neri, yeah.